I'm going to be moderating from back there, and I'll introduce our panel in just a second, but we have a wonderful group of people. We're going to talk through some of the transitions that are going to be happening with our medicinal and adult use program that we think. We'll get into it here in just a second to see where we stand. We'll talk through some socioeconomic issues. We'll talk through some personal possession and issues that you may face as a person in your house dealing with this gray area that we live in between medicinal and adult use cannabis in the state of Ohio. So without further ado, let me introduce all the folks that are up here on the panel. I'm going to kind of go through and read these alphabetical, just for easy access here for the most part. Let's get started. First off, right here on the end, Brian Adams. Brian is an MC, a producer, and activist. He is also the host of the Blaze and Enthuse podcast. He is the former executive director of Cleveland Normal. He is the founder of Sensible Cleveland. He is also the only person who's been at the school longer than me, the founding instructor here at the Cleveland School of Cannabis, along with being the former director of education at the Harrington Institute for Cannabis Education. Brian Adams joining us today.
Thanks so much.
Next to Brian, we have Mary Allender. Mary is a passionate Ohio activist deeply involved in the cannabis advocacy and education for well over a decade. She is currently with NAR Reserve Dispensaries. She's also been a driving force in legalization and education efforts with MedicaidOH.com, also here at the Cleveland School of Cannabis and Hocking College. Once again, Mary Oliver. Coming down the road to Senate Representative Jamie Callender. He is serving his third term in the Ohio House of Representatives for the 57th House District. Mr. Callender has a long history of community service and leadership in Lake County. Tremendous accolades for his work ethic and Republican leadership, often recognized for advocacy in various areas, including protecting constitutional rights and education reform. Mr. Callender. Someone here is the executive director of Ohio Normal. He has been actively involved in activism of cannabis for over 15 years. Currently sitting as a member of the Disability Advisory Council, a patient consultant as well. Once again, Simon Dunkel. And we have also Tom Herron joining us today. Tom Herron has been a huge force behind where we sit today with issue 2, as well as other Ohio cannabis legalization efforts, a highly sought after attorney. Really renowned for growing businesses, especially in Ohio, and serving as the executive vice president of the Ohio Hemp Association. Tom Herron. Tom is another T. Tim Johnson. Tim Johnson is a retired law enforcement officer and a veteran of the United States Air Force and the founder of Cannabis Safety First. Tim has been a tremendous advocate for the patient, for consumer rights, criminal justice reform, as well as those legislative amendments for cannabis. Tim Johnson. Farther to your left, Jared Maloof, the CEO of Standard Wellness and the former CFO of CSC Metals. Jared is a well-versed and licensed CPA, seasoned professional, overseeing the majority of business operations of one of Ohio's premier cannabis companies. Jared Maloof. On cannabis law and policy, the former executive director of the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. Packer continues to contribute to cannabis reform through various roles, including being the vice chair of the Cannabis Regulators for Color Coalition and the director of drug markets and legal regulation at the Drug Policy Alliance. Pat Packer. We also have Theodore Russell. Theodore Russell is currently a law and policy instructor at the Cleveland School of Cannabis, recently completing his Juris Doctor in Health Law and Master of Public Health from Case Western Reserve, where he is also a Compliance and Risk Management Fellow at Case Western Reserve University, earning his second master's degree in this area. Got an amazing group of people up here to talk through our program today, so I'm very excited to go through that. To get us started then, let's go ahead and just kind of get an overview. Before we dig into the questions that we want to talk about with issue 2, let's turn to Tim Johnson, who's going to give us a brief overview of where we sit right now with issue 2, with the medical program and our transition to adult use cannabis, and then we'll dig into those details. Go ahead, Tim.
All right, thanks, BC. Before I get started, I want to give a special thanks to Tom here. He is the author of the language. He's been doing it for a few years, and he's been very persistent. He's finally come through with the 2.2 million votes that we brought to the polls. We have adult choice marijuana in Ohio now, or adult choice cannabis legalization. And next to him is Rep. Callender. I know they've been introduced, but a big shout out to him as well for House Bill 354, which is the so to say the steering mechanism right now for issue 2, where it's headed, the revisional part of it. So two great people here that have done a lot for getting us where we are today. And I'm sure where I don't talk about it, they'll probably pick up on some of the issue 2 stuff. Issue 2, as it stands right now in Ohio on December 7th, went into full force and effect. It activated the Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 3780, which are the laws of the program. What is happening right now is the 3780 chapter of the Ohio Administrative Code is being created. That's the rules. Those rules are being promulgated currently as some of the license holders and some of the other people in the room probably received a thing from the Department of Commerce about the first step of some of the licenses that are going to go out for dispensaries. And a little bit, they actually touched on the medical program too. But today we want to kind of be focused on what's happening in Ohio with issue 2. So what happened on the 7th of December? Well, outside your home, 2.5 ounces possession of cannabis per weight, you're good to go. You're free. So also inside your home or in your backyard when it gets warmer, per adult, 6 plants in a house up to 2 adults, which would be 12 plants. Those rules are, the laws are in effect, but as I said, those rules are being created and they will come soon. Outside of that, we also have public consumption. Be very cautious on this at this point in time. We've already received 1 warning from the director of the Division of Cannabis Control, the new control unit in Ohio. We also got rid of the Ohio Board of Pharmacy, bless their souls. So now we go straight to the Department of Commerce, to this division. They got rid of the, or they're going to, it sounds like, they're going to help get rid of the patient fee to the Board of Pharmacy as a result of eliminating that agency. So it's kind of trying to help and generate and vigorize kind of that the medical cannabis industry again, as the adult steps into it. So as far as consumption has been a big topic. Can we go outside? Can we go to wherever, in the public and where they have restaurants, bars, whatever you might want to call them, any kind of store? And if they have an outdoor smoking area, can we go out there and smoke it if it's on private property? If they have a liquor license, that's a no-no at this point in time. That is being worked on. I'll let maybe Rep. Callender can talk on that one. So we want to touch base with that. Also, we're as an adult right now, if you're going to consume outside, of course, y'all heard the thing that everybody can purchase now or have possession, but where do they buy it at? Well, there isn't a rule in there that says, or a law that says where they have to buy it at. So, point in case, kind of a little loophole right there. As long as you're on private property and you have the permission, no liquor license, you should be good to go. So those are some of the things, the highlights, as far as issue 2 and where we're actually at right now in Ohio. You'll hear a lot today about, I guess, the progress of it, as far as maybe where some of the language is going, as far as the rulemaking process and how things are happening there. So with that, I'll turn it back over to BC.
Does anyone else there have something like to add to just that general overview? We are going to dig into it, but is there something that we'd like to discuss that anyone knows about issue 2, or should we just go ahead and dig into it? Grab our shovels, we're gonna start digging in. All right, I would be remiss if I did not announce our last minute to the panel. I apologize. Let's give a round of applause for Darnell Brewer, who is a state representative. Representative Juanita Bren, representing her attendance today. So thank you, Darnell, for joining us today. Let's start with this. I think, and Tim kind of alluded to it, and you can feel free to kind of someone start and feel free to piggyback off each other's topics here. But I think one of the things that probably at the first front of most people that are in the medical program is kind of the whens and the wheres, right? Like what's happening now. So we know that we don't know the dates and times, and we know that there's going to be a lot of change coming. So nothing today is concrete, but from your past experiences with this transition from medical to adult use, what can people in Ohio probably expect? What are some things they should be aware of? In particular, let's start product availability, price points, kind of the purchasing effort, and then we'll dig into the background of it. So if anyone would like to get us started, how and what can we expect probably in these next 4 or 5 months as we transition from a medicinal state to a state with both medicinal and adult use cannabis? Tom Heron, take it away.
Under issue two's pretty express language. There are some timelines set out under Ohio law currently, right? So within 6 months of issue two going into effect, so we're talking first week of June of this year, the state is required, the Department of Commerce is required to make applications available for new adult use licenses. The law also says if they don't act on those applications within 3 months, the applicant can basically take the Department of Commerce to court to try to get an order forcing them to act on those applications. And if you are an existing medical operator, you can actually operate under a temporary adult use license during the pendency of whatever that litigation is. Now, I will tell you, the Department of Commerce knows these deadlines. They are working very hard to promulgate rules to meet these timelines so that we don't have to resort to all of that nonsense and to go to court. So we've heard right from the director of the department, we've heard from superintendent of the DCC, Jim Canepa, that they are intending to make applications available in June and then to issue what are called provisional licenses in September. Folks, we probably will see the first sale of adult use marijuana here in Ohio sometime between September and November, depending on how soon existing dispensaries can pass a final inspection and obtain a certificate of operation. From a product availability standpoint, everything you see in the medical market should be available in the adult use market, in addition to combustible marijuana products, right? Because of course we know nobody in the medical program is buying flower and smoking it. That would be illegal. So now we're ending that confusion, and we will have products that will represent really what you see in adult use markets throughout the country. And that's really important because those products are already available in an adult use market here in Ohio. It's called the illicit market. And so we have to ensure that our legal operators can compete with the illicit market and also that they can compete with dispensaries in Michigan so that we can bring that revenue back from the state up north and generate new tax revenue here in Ohio. So I know lots of questions. When is this? Why is it taking so long? Well, look, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? We're transitioning we had a brand new program. We got our feet underneath us and now we're building another brand new program. And it's going to take a couple of months to get there, but it was really important that we ended the injustice of prohibition on the day that the law went into effect. And now we're just building out the commercial side of the industry.
And if I could add to the timeline of things, having been one of the original key employees here for the medical program, working at the botanist / Acreage Holdings, the timeline is fleeting too, right? There may be things that come up that cause, maybe a delay or something like that. So we all have to keep that in mind as well, because, if you remember, and I'll just toot our CSC horn here, the original program for medical had only flower on the shelves from Buckeye Relief. And guess who trimmed that flower, by the way? Students. But seriously, it's going to be some time, folks. Very much want to have some of you focus on your home cultivation abilities at this time. It's actually pretty important to learn how to do for yourself. And that just goes for all agricultural products and medicinal products alike. So just wanted to throw that out there. The timeline is in flux at all times. So don't get set on something happening here or there. That's why I love how you threw that window of September to November, because that's a real window. The program for medical should have been fully operational. It said in the law, should have been fully operational 2016. We didn't open dispensary doors until 2019. I can witness and attest to that. Grandma standing out in the cold, line wrapped around the corner, and I'm a patient as well in this program. So it's very important to expedite it as best we can, because we're not just legalizing adult use or recreational, whatever that means, right? What is recreational anyway? The 420-yard hash dash? Are we talking about the blunt Olympics? What is recreational? Does anybody go to a recreational bar? Does it say recreational on it? I don't understand that word. So what we're doing is expanding medicinal therapeutic access to people who are 21 and older. Whether you believe that or not is up to debate. That's why we're here.
Fine.
Yeah, I'm interested to find out, how much of the bind over, I guess is a good term, from the medical program for patients, as far as them being able to grow, keeping the fallacy that everybody vapes their marijuana. Are we bound over to that, or with recreational use, do we get the freedom that we should have had with the medical, as far as being able to make my own edibles? And things like that. I mean, because with the maladies that I have, quite frankly, I'm not really feeling beholden to anything for anyone. I'm looking for relief and trying to make my last days as palatable as they can be. So, limits and things like that, are a real pain for someone like me. But I really want to know, am I free now to sort of do what I want to do, what, quite frankly, I've already been doing? On recommendations from my doctor as far as using a bong or a water pipe. Not being bound to limits. Can I have both the limits from recreational and medical? Is that?
I think it's a good question. So especially from our folks with law backgrounds, what should our patients, what should our legal adult use consumers, we're in this gray area when it comes to growing, when it comes to possession, when it comes to transportation. What type of experiences, maybe Kat with some other states that have gone through this, should they be aware of? I mean, I know we're in this gray area, so what advice or recommendations for folks who are living in the gray and they're trying to grow and they're trying to make their own edibles and they're trying to carry legally? How should they proceed? What advice should we give them if they're, dealing with law enforcement? What are some steps or precautions people can take as we live in this gray area between medicinal adult use?
I'll address this one, although any of the lawyers could. Let me start with the lawyer disclaimer. We are not giving advice here. This is not legal advice. This is the current opinion and the current status. As a legislator, we see what's happening, and know that things are, when he says in flux, they're really in flux. We have rulemaking. We have a state senate that's trying to regulate or change what passed in issue 2. We have a House, thank you for your help, that has successfully avoided taking up the Senate's offers to help. So there's a lot in flux. So anything that we say here from a legal standpoint, first of all, is not legal advice. And secondly, is as of this second. It may change as early as Tuesday when the House and Senate are back in session. So starting with that, the answer to your question is, once the law went into effect, and it is in effect now, as passed by the folks, you are allowed to smoke, period. You are allowed to possess up to 2.5 ounces outside your house. You are allowed to grow up to 6 plants per individual or 12 per household. That is the law as of right this second. Where you get that 2.5 ounces or what you're smoking is not currently addressed. So if you got something through the medical program and it was flour intended to vape because you weren't allowed to smoke, and you now smoke it, that is legal. I know that was a long way to get to the question. How do we have that on the thing?
The state house allows me to give you that time. So.
Yes, yeah, I would like to add just one thing. Specifically on the public health matter that you're mentioning, and a lot of patients having needs for access to cannabis, but then the law requiring that physicians kind of restrict that access to only what qualifying conditions are. And I just want to point out how much that sticks out from the regular practice of medicine, where physicians would be able to, diagnose a patient, following the standard of care, and then really make a very broad decision about what they should recommend or prescribe to the patient. And like specifically with dietary supplements, being able to recommend, you need to maybe increase your vitamin D intake by an amount that you find to be effective. And then patients kind of engaging in self-help from that point forward. And so I think, having access to the substance, while doctors have a very restricted ability to prescribe that substance or recommend, I guess, for a better term, that substance to these qualifying conditions, and then sometimes neglect a body of evidence from clinical research that might show impact toward other indications. And if it were an approved drug, they would be able to have that off-label prescription use, but they're not able to do that with the current qualifying condition standard under the medical. And so I feel that there creates kind of a gray area here for patients who may feel that they are using cannabis for a therapeutic purpose that is disease related. But because that doesn't necessarily qualify as one of the conditions from the legislature, the physicians really aren't able to be as effective in recommending how they would moderate their use.
The thing I'll add on this, the question in part, considering what should consumers and just everyday Ohioans keep in mind as this process is moving forward. Things are in flux, and I say that in part because this is not the time for folks to sit on their hands and get comfortable. I think that this is a real opportune time for folks to get active. Unfortunately, we could be living in a golden age in a moment where like we're living with the best set of conditions that we might have. And I say that in part because we have rights today that certain Ohio lawmakers have proposed to already take away from us as adult use consumers in Ohio. So for example, issue 2 allowed individuals, adults 21 and older, to share cannabis, to whether passing a joint or I want to gift you a plant. There have been proposals introduced that would criminalize literally just sharing cannabis. Ohio lawmakers have introduced proposals that would create new mandatory minimums for cannabis activities, simply for consuming while a passenger in a vehicle. There have been legal protections. Issue 2 gave individuals legal protections around things like health rights or parental rights. Those things have been proposed to be taken away. And so my concern is that while issue 2 had this package of rights, package of protections, we could see with these proposals, these things being scaled away to a point where legalization is somehow more criminal than criminalization. And so what you've heard me say when I'm testifying in front of the legislature is, I don't want to see Ohio move forward with this puff police agenda. And I've used this term puff police because I really and I'll talk about this throughout today's presentation, but there are just a number of themes that keep coming up that indicate to me that many of the lawmakers here in Ohio, their priority is not with the people. Their priority is with law enforcement. And if we know anything about cannabis criminalization and the larger war on drugs, this is not going to be good for us. And I say this as a collective us, the cannabis community. And so my advice to folks is to stay engaged, stay active, because these things are being chipped away at every day. And folks try to do it real quick, real silently, while folks weren't paying attention. And fortunately, because we had legislatures who were working together and trying to put the brakes on things, folks weren't able to do this overnight. But I think those priorities are still there.
I think it's one thing you have to worry about is intent. Because I mean, you can go back to when Governor DeWine went to Colorado and look at his itinerary for who he spoke to, what he did. I don't remember him talking to the Stanleys, Charlotte's Web, any of that. But it was all regulatory enforcement. How can we put these people in a corner? And I think when the graphic comes up on discrimination, I was surprised that all that was me, and it actually happened, but it did, and it's all documented. And it's nuts. So the intent is what I'm worried about, is that at the same time you're giving us the right, your intent is, oh yeah, we'll give it to them, but boy, it's gonna be fun to watch them squirm with the regulatory stuff. And the state agencies turn them down for services, and, you know, things happen with employment and housing and all of that. It just, the intent just kind of looks strange to me, and has since DeWine's trip to Colorado.
I want to hear from one more of our representatives. Darnell, do you have? I know we heard from Mr. Calendar over here. Did you have something to add to that?
Well, I just want to echo what the young lady said. This is a perfect opportunity for everyone to have a voice at the table. Especially for communities that look like the one I represent, like me. Make sure we don't criminalize, like you said, something based on the intent. So I'm glad that we have Rep. County who has been working on this issue as well. And working not just with this issue, but before the issue came to the table, to make sure we all at the table. But we do need your voices. There's a perfect opportunity for everyone in this room to start spreading the word and come down and watch what we do. Make sure your voices are heard and at the table, because as we put these recommendations forward, we're on different sides of the aisle, but when you guys come together, we can say, hey, this is better for Ohio and not just for our party. So we definitely need everyone at the table with us watching.
I was curious too, because we have two representatives from people currently in the industry. So then Jared and Mary, after that, how are you guys preparing for this? How are you thinking living in the gray? You are a business, you are selling, working with patients, but now preparing for adult use at the same time, and living in this gray must be difficult on your business as well. So Jared and then Mary, if you could talk a little bit about how maybe people who are already currently in the plant touching business, what their thoughts are as we live in this gray area.
Absolutely. Before I get to that though, I want to add that we all owe Tom Herron a great debt of gratitude for getting this over the finish line. Now, the most important person in cannabis today is Representative Callender, because he is standing up for all of us. He is, so much pressure is being put on this man, from Governor DeWine to Senator Huffman to everybody, and he has stood strong this whole time. And so we all need to channel our energy to Representative Callender and help him as he moves forward through the next phase. So as far as how we're preparing, we're hoping to add new stores, and there's 120 places to purchase cannabis right now. That's far too few. So many people will be denied access if we don't get stores open quickly. So we're really pushing to try to get the department, and they're working very hard, as Tom said, they're working extremely hard. Try to get the department to help us move along getting the dispensaries open, the ones that we need. We're hoping to, add employees and hire people. It's a little bit challenging when you don't know the exact timeline on which it will get implemented, but we are opening the doors and we're bringing people in.
And as for me at NAR Reserve, my job is mainly to just keep educating the staff. I have to keep an eye on all the regulations that are going on. Every article that comes out, I am gathering information and spreading it to all the staff members at NAR Reserve Columbus, because we have tons of patients coming in every single day asking, can I buy adult use today? Do I have to have a card? What's happening with issue 2? Am I allowed to grow? Are they cutting the concentrates down to 50%? All these questions. So for me, on the dispensary side, us preparing is just keeping an eye on the law, making sure that everyone from the bud tenders to the investors of the business know what's going on, so that they can participate in the public commentary that's going on right now, or whatever they may need to do to gear up for the adult use market, because I'm sure most dispensaries are getting ready for it. And we're just all waiting for those regulations to know how much staff we need to bring in and what we need to prepare for.
It is gonna be a huge influx of consumers, right? Both on a medicinal level as well as an adult use when we come forward, which is gonna be an influx of human beings who are consuming cannabis. On a protection level, when people are thinking about getting jobs and then trying to consume the plant, when people are thinking about an issue we deal with now in Ohio, carrying a weapon and then trying to possess cannabis. When we're thinking about that, what type of, and maybe to some of our politicians on there or legal experts, not advice, clearly, but maybe a good opinion when it comes to that area. How should people, or what are we thinking about the regular folks who are out there trying to medicate or trying to use this plant in a responsible manner, that are going to maybe be denied jobs, that are going to maybe be denied public housing, maybe be denied disability checks? I know we have some issues with that. Well, have we built in those protections, or with those areas, what are we thinking when it comes to the protections of consumers going forward in that area? Go ahead, Tim.
Let me start with that, BC, from a street perspective, and then they can get into it in the courts, okay? And it kind of touches on the last question at hand. Realize that just because chapter 3780 of the revised code has been created, and thanks to all your votes, we still have chapter 2925 in the Ohio Revised Code. It's very active about criminal drugs, OBIs, possession of drugs, et cetera, okay? So the gray area here is license holders, they have a state certificate, they're protected, they're in a state program. If you go outside of the program rules, if, you know, you may be considered, as far as a consumer, you don't have a license or an identification if you get in the judicial system to say, oh, no, I was operating in the medical or in the adult program, such as what Simon asked, you know, is he or is he not? That's that gray area. So for consumers on the streets and, you know, personal cultivators and so forth, 21 and over, remember that still applies. So just kind of be respectful, be cautious as we move forward, as a lot of it said. I know Kat spoke on it. I believe she testified on it as well. But those are things, you know, keep in mind, pass along, and as Mary brought up, a lot of the stuff that's out there, we'll get off of this. I believe it's House Bill 86 was actually a liquor bill. I believe the cannabis revision and the hemp revision that came with that probably be redacted, and the liquor part will probably go to, of course. I may get that on the street. But, you know, so look at that, because I get a lot of stuff all the time. Well, House Bill 86 said this. No, we're going with what Tom's created here, what you have voted in, what the legislators are helping guide and responsibly trying to keep it intact. So just keep that in mind.
Can we have Dora? Can't we have Cora?
I think part of the reality that I want folks to keep in mind, particularly consumers, is that you can still be legally discriminated against for your cannabis use, right? Make no mistake. I think issue 2 put some protections in place that are already proposals from the legislature that would try and remove some of those protections. But even if issue 2 weren't touched, talking about it today, you can still be discriminated against as a cannabis user, whether it's in housing, education, and employment. And I think that this is another one of these things where, and thank you, Tom, for, you know, getting us where we are, but now we need to go further. I think that instead of just protecting what we've got, we also need to try and push and gain new protections for cannabis consumers. I really don't want to see this legalization effort be regressive. One of the things that I've seen proposed, for example, issue 2 already allowed for landlords to make their own policies on whether or not you can consume. Well, there was a proposal and one of the bills that had been introduced that would not only allow the landlord to evict you, but you're also going to get a criminal penalty from the police. It's like, okay, it's one thing. It's enough for you to be evicted. Why do we need to have this additional criminal penalty on top of it? And so I say that again to say, get active, make sure that folks are advocating. But I think that we need to extend this pressure campaign because I don't think that it's just yours to hold. I think that we need to be able to hold our entire government accountable for this. And I'd like to see the industry play a role in this as well.
and it couldn't really be made. However, with the federal government currently investigating to reschedule, possibly Schedule 3, then it will be possible to have, legally at the federal level, medical applications for cannabis. And when that does happen, I would hope that under the Affordable Care Act or under the Civil Rights Act, or even under HIPAA, that there would be some kind of privacy protections that apply at the federal level and protect individuals in states regardless of the legalization recreationally or medically, or no legalization at all. That could at least be protected healthcare information that would add a level of insulation from, subpoenas or from, police investigation and things like that, at least in the healthcare context in those states. That's kind of my thoughts, but as far as the community, the research shows that the community of cannabis users, whether that is recreational or medical, do not really care that much about the evidence of efficacy, meaning how well does the drug achieve the purpose for which it is advertised to achieve, reducing anxiety or reducing insomnia or what have you. They don't care what that evidence really says, but they care heavily about safety, product safety and reliability of the claims of the product. And so I think that when we're thinking about how to protect communities, what the communities are telling us is that safety and ensuring that the products are actually safe and that the marketplace is safe for business professionals, for everyone. I think that's really the population level concern.
I'd like to respond to the question about what's industry doing. As part of industry, I would say that we passed the medical law several years ago, and we passed with everybody's help, we passed the adult use law. I've spoken in front of the Senate a few times, and I've had agents of the Board of Pharmacy parked outside of my house for weeks at a time. So, and I'm an activist. So like, I think that we have a lot to be proud of with the industry leaders that have blazed the path thus far.
Yeah, I will echo that as well. And BC, to one of your questions, what should consumers be doing now? Continue to renew your medical cards. Continue to buy products through the legal market where it is tested, right? Where it's reliable, it's consistent, to support and also support the companies that are out there that are advocating for consumers, who are advocating for patients, so that we can create, a real meaningful adult use program here in the state of Ohio. But look, Kat's right. I mean, we're not done. We passed a law. That law now has to get implemented, but we always have to keep looking at how we can make it better, right? The criminal justice side of this issue cannot be ignored. I won't bore everybody with all of the legal nuances as to why we could and couldn't include certain things within the ballot language itself. But, you have to take the world as you find it. And so guys, Ohio's a red state. And we legalized marijuana with 57% of the vote in a red Trump state. Like, that's a huge signal to Republicans down in Columbus as to where the voters are on this issue. And so now we have to leverage that success to continue to improve the law and to make sure that we're not forgetting about consumers. We're not forgetting about the criminal justice aspect. So continue to stay involved as we continue to sort of have those fights down in the legislature.
Could you guys bring that graphic back up that makes me a poster child of discrimination?
Graphic coming up here on the screen that
Thank
Nicole
you.
had shared.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that thin wheel of love, it includes insurance, healthcare, emergency services. I was denied EMS transportation because I was a medical patient.
What?
Yeah, in Toledo, November 18th of 21. Housing, National Church residents actually asked me to counsel other patients in the community because they couldn't. They got caught with some HUD violations. Members of the community came to me and said, "Hey, you were at Laverne, right? Can you help us form a government?" And so I did. And they came a couple weeks later and said, "Here's your first eviction notice. If you're none of you using marijuana products on the property ever again, we'll kick you out. So I moved in the middle of COVID. And then with insurance, Medicaid finally responded. I wrote a contract to get to dispensaries with Molina Insurance in Columbus. That worked for 3 years. When Medicinals used the outline to get patients of theirs to the dispensary. Moved to Toledo, did the same contract again, except this time I added Michigan. So for 1.5 years, they did Ohio and Michigan, asked to get rid of Simpson for my bladder cancer. And that's when they said, "You're going to dispensaries?" And of course, didn't get due process, contacted over 10 agencies. Department of Insurance responded and said, "We can't do anything about what they did, but we can do something about how they did it." Wow, consolation prize, cool. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense, and it can't be passed on into, you know, what Tom and everybody's worked so hard on. I mean, and that's the thing that concerns me is what intent or not, all of this happened. And it all needs attention for everybody else. I'm not standing here saying, "Give me $1 million in a non-disclosure agreement." I'm saying, don't do this to the rest of the planet or the state. In the faulty products category, I have 9 returns to the program. 5 of those were to Firelands. I have nothing personal against Firelands. They've been great about returns and whatever. But the problem is the constancy of that. Vapes, flour, edibles. I've got a gummy right now that the state won't even test. It's got a big black dot in the middle of it that looks like some sort of flour material, but the state won't test it. Rob and the folks at Firelands can't test it. So what are we supposed to do with that? I mean, they had recalls over packaging, but what about that dot? You know, and it doesn't matter to anybody. And that's really disconcerting, not just for me. I mean, I named the gummy Gus and asked a friend's daughter that goes to CCAD to, you know, make it live, a graphic gummy, just because it needs attention. I'm not trying to get any advantage on anybody, other than just say, we can't move this forward onto the whole population of the state. We got to stop right now and say, okay, code of ethics, standards of practice. What are we going to do? How do we enforce this? How do we make it so that we can work back and forth and say, okay, there's a problem with this, let's test it, whether it's red flagging themselves or coordinating with patients or consumers, but it needs to get, you know, more intense, and it needs to be a friendly interaction instead of sort of an adversarial. We can't talk about that. We're trying to do too much to move forward with what we have, which is what I finally got for violence, because I said, let's go, you know, to the governor or the legislature together and say, we've got to correct these things. And the response was no.
Well, it's clear there's gonna be a lot of change as we go up, and so I think as we've talked about and highlighted a lot, we're gonna have to go through that area. So let's move forward a little bit, and I want you to kind of put on your role-playing brains. We're gonna brainstorm a little bit. From those of you, what do you think? Whenever this bill gets signed, whenever we get the OACs written up, whenever we get the now open light to flick on, what's gonna happen in that first 6 months? Do you expect chaos? Do you expect smoothness? Those of you that have been in the weeds, pun fully intended, what do you expect to happen in that first 6 to 8 months? And some of you have been through this already in other states. What do you think is going to happen? Like your gut, your imagination. What do you think is going to happen? Not what we hope happens, but what do we really think is going to happen? Kat, I want to start with you. You've been this already, and then we'll go down the group in your thoughts.
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to run the City of LA's Department of Cannabis Regulation when they were moving through their adult use and medical program. Lots of trauma stories from that experience. But I think with the framework that Ohio has, at least with giving preference to existing operators, I think that that's pretty simple. I actually have more concern about what the opportunity is going to look like for new applicants. One of the kind of concerns that I had about issue 2 is that I continue to say this, I think it gave the haves more before it gave the have-nots any. Folks like to complain about preference programs, particularly for equity programs, but nobody complains about preference programs for existing medical operators. And I know that there's this intention to try and make sure folks have early access to sales, et cetera. But what I can tell you from my experience in LA and now working with regulators all across the country, who kind of look back and reflect on this, is that it's not as important for things to happen expeditiously. Things need to happen correctly and fairly. And the reality is that Ohio is only going to have an opportunity to kind of start and kickstart its adult use market one time. And what I'd like to see from the legislature is a real intent from government leaders, is a real intention to make sure that there's an opportunity for new entrants to the market, to make sure that the market is competitive, and to make sure that it stands up its social equity and jobs program. That's critically important to ensure that particularly communities that were disproportionately impacted by cannabis criminalization have access to licensure. And I say this as someone who's a drug policy advocate, organizer, et cetera, and who's worked on these legalization campaigns. And unfortunately, sometimes the more I look at this, some of legalization looks like criminalization with an exception. Right, for certain folks who get licenses. And so it's really important that we're not just talking about quote unquote eliminating the unlicensed market, but what does it look like to transition that market and to allow everyone to have access to do this fairly. I'll kick it over to other folks, but just want to add a point because I'm sitting right next to Representative Callender. I know that there's been a conversation about particularly House Bill 354 with the licensing and social equity program. And that particular bill proposes to shift those things to counties, to shift the responsibility of administering the social equity program to counties. I continue to advise and advocate against that. In particular, as it relates to the licensing and social equity program. Imagine the licensing and social equity program is supposed to have like 40 or 50 licenses for applicants that's administered by the state. Now, imagine a program, a licensing program that's administered by the state, but you have potentially 88 different counties that are supposed to certify applicants to participate in the program. 88 different counties doing outreach, 88 different counties providing financial assistance and technical assistance and licensing support. And what we're going to see with that is just a disparity because it's going to be essentially, and I don't even necessarily know that a jurisdiction would be able to provide timely support to participate in a state license application process. And so I do think, and I'm encouraging the state to think a little bit more critically about what the rollout of that looks like. I know that there's an intention to have counties be more involved and have a little bit more leverage on what to do with tax revenue. We just remind folks that issue 2 did give money to communities. And so I say this in part because there are these proposals that would shift money away from cannabis social equity jobs program to communities. Communities already have a fund. There's a community host fund. If we want to talk about what communities do with that money, I think that that's the place to have that conversation, not to divert the cannabis social equity jobs fund for other purposes or allow those particular programs to be administered by the county. And I say that as someone who ran and started a local social equity program and tried to manage that interaction with the state. And if I had an opportunity to do it over, I'd tell the state, you run that program, allow us to provide some assistance, but particularly when the license is being issued by the state, to try and assume that a county is going to be able to provide timely assistance to help an applicant participate in the market. Folks would be better off just applying without the assistance.
Anybody else thinking about the next thing?
Well, let me address that directly because that's a point that bears a lot of discussion. I very much appreciate your input. And someone whose name was mentioned earlier, Representative Pratt, has been at the forefront of the equity and inclusion and has done a yeoman's work to make sure it was included and that we address that. So I want to give a shout out to her for that.
Absolutely.
And make sure you tell her I did that. She's a wonderful lady. But in politics, being of different parties, you don't always hear back the nice things the other party said about you. So what's going on in Columbus? And I don't know if this is later in the agenda and I'm getting ahead enough, but so when issue 2 passed, there was an immediate knee-jerk reaction among politicians, go figure, to try to control, for lack of a better word, what's happening. Now, I've been advocating for adult use. I had an adult use bill 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and this year. So luckily, in the House, folks turned to me and said, well, gosh, Jamie, got a ponytail and you've been working the industry, tell us how this is going to work.
You trust me.
The Senate didn't have the benefit of that kind of advice. In fact, they did the same thing, but in reverse. Jamie, you've got a ponytail. Why would we listen to you? You go to Grateful Dead concerts every week. That's just not, you know, you're not the one we want to take political advice from.
The VW microbus that got their attention.
It was, well, yeah, the week in Mexico with, Dead Company last week. But, so the Senate immediately, and with the governor's strong support, put out language that really changed some of the fundamental elements of issue 2. Now, issue 2 is an initiated statute. A statute can be changed by the legislature. So to an earlier point about advocacy, advocacy doesn't end now. It doesn't end once you're able to go someplace and purchase and use, because the revised code can be revised any day, any year. So that advocacy needs to continue. The way you guys and a lot of folks at this table, and I see people out there that attended the House Finance Committees, that testified, that have talked to legislators, do not stop that advocacy. That advocacy, those finance hearings, is why we don't have bad legislation already. I can only fight. I'm kind of a minority within my party with my position on this. So the Senate has issued language. They said what they needed to do. The governor supported that, and it had to be done before the end of the year, before the bill went into effect or the world went in.
Had to.
Yeah, it absolutely had to. So the question earlier about what happens the day it goes into effect, we've already passed that date, and the answer was nothing. Not one darn thing.
Sky's still up there too.
It appears to be. It appears to be.
the sky today.
All I know is that in some areas it's skunk mating season, but other than that, there's been, so we cleared the first hurdle, and part of that, what gave the House the ability, our chamber, the ability to not act, was the fact that we had you all advocating professionally, articulately, and with data and real life evidence to back up what you were saying, the real life stories, the issues in other states. That kind of factual data, not the in your face, you're wrong, but the bringing in real facts and data has really helped us so far in the House. So House Bill 354 was introduced when the Senate was doing what they were doing, and they were going to eliminate inequity. They were going to increase taxes significantly. They were going to change where the taxes went to. They were going to limit the number of plants you could home grow. There's about a dozen things in there that were, to me, unacceptable. I assumed to everyone in this room unacceptable. But there was a fear within our chamber that there was a will to do the same thing the Senate was doing. So we were looking for something to lessen the impact of that. But because of the folks in this room and others that are hopefully watching online and others that we talk to, we were able to do nothing. Which was really a good thing for us to do, and I'm enjoying doing nothing. I know that sounds unusual, but let's ask our politicians to do nothing.
Yeah.
I want to say it was the most ineffective legislature in 70 years, so I think they got the.
And I'm proud of it. Because the people did something, and quite frankly, the will of the people shows the will of the people more than a legislative vote, right? That's my thought. So, but as we move forward, the pressure, you mentioned the pressure that's on, there is an intense amount of pressure coming from the governor, from certain advocates that are not with us, from some of the law enforcement entities, from the Senate, who feels a little bit spanked, maybe, that the world didn't end like they said it would. They've lost some credibility on this issue. And they're upset that the House kind of adopted the tagline that we are the people's house and we're gonna listen to the will of the people. But we need to keep hearing the will of the people and be reminded of that. So some of the things that are in 354 were in there because it was a compromise draft, because we thought we needed to act by the end of the year last year. So some of the things that you've expressed that are problematic, but in the normal course of legislation, there's some compromises that have to be made to keep the really bad stuff away. The areas we refuse to compromise on, just so you know, we're home grow and having some kind of equity and inclusion program. Those are two things the Senate took out, and again, I'll thank Representative Brett for her advocacy, you for your advocacy in that. But as a chamber, we have said no, that the people voted on that. That was a fundamental part of issue 2. 6 plants, 12 per household was a fundamental part of issue 2. We are not backing away from either of those. And every day that goes by, there's less compromise to be done because we're further along. The rulemaking process is ongoing now. It's different than the legislative process, but there is public input. So we need you all to be involved in that as well. Now, the rules will go through something called JCAR in the legislature. So there is an opportunity for the legislature to veto rules. Now, here's the catch-22. If the Department of Commerce puts out rules that are not great, that we don't like, JCAR, we as a legislature can stop those. But what that does is that delays any rules. So we really want to make sure that those rules are done well the first time. So please keep educated on how you can do that, how you can get involved in the rulemaking process. I assume others in the sitting to my.
Yes, how can we? Tell us how.
We're gonna cover it at the very end.
Okay.
To highlight that, I do want to, before we go any further, we're about halfway through. We've unpacked a lot and we got some few more topics to cover. Wanted to see if anyone in this audience here had a question for anyone up about some of the topics we've covered thus far. And then we'll move on to some other topics. Go ahead, right there.
While we have legislators here that are addressing some big questions, we have had for decades a 99-gram decrim in the state of Ohio. So you're allowed to make rules. Rules can be adding to those, not just taking away. So you do have, I mean, I'm sure will come in rulemaking. You know, that's a toss-up, but we have to get back to what we've had at least for decades, the 99 grams. Now, in some cities, a lot of my friends from Sensible Movement Coalition have decrimmed up to 199 grams. Thank you, Brian. Yes, a big. And so I'd like to see that. That would be my ask, because as Kat said, sometimes legalization involves more criminalization. And that was an obvious step back for activists like myself, was that. And adding concentrates and that paraphernalia, we've got to, put that in there while we have the chance. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
I snickered with the paraphernalia. I'll tell you a story offline about wine hitters and Governor DeWine.
A story I'd like to hear, Jim.
Yeah, come on.
Let's go ahead.
Yeah, story time.
The after hours. So, any other questions? Go ahead, right there.
I have a question that people ask me all the time, never know how to answer. It's about delivery. Nothing as in the bill has been about delivery, and it seems very inconvenient, especially in a world where you can get any of your drugs delivered to your house, if you get a pharmacy or anything like that. Seems silly not to have that on the radar and not in any of the discussions, and I just want to know, where do we stand on that?
Yeah, so under the statute, the Department of Commerce is charged with promulgating rules so that dispensaries can make deliveries to consumers once those rules are finalized.
What about delivery service that's a separate entity from those dispensaries or cultivators?
The language of issue 2 requires the deliveries to be made by dispensaries.
Okay.
However, we do have, even within the medical program, even though product has to go from cultivator to processor, processor to dispensary, or cultivator to processor, there are some companies that do come in and subcontract with those licensees. And then their drivers end up getting, badged as employees of those licensees. So there are opportunities for folks to come in on a sort of contract basis.
You talking about delivery, I think you kind of touched on it, delivery from the dispenser, the private
Like
company.
an ancillary service.
Yeah.
Doers are us delivery.
Right,
Yeah.
yes.
That's kind of real technical. I'm gonna speak from what I know is that you're not necessarily working for the licensee, as he said, so now you're independent. I don't see that language in there anywhere, and it may be something we'll have to entertain, if not now, later, during criminal justice.
Yeah.
And other jurisdictions do have standalone delivery licenses that are separate and apart from the retail facility. And so this may be an opportunity as the legislature continues to revise the code to look at adding new license types.
Goodness.
I've encouraged folks to also consider the on-site consumption license as a license type in Ohio.
I mean, is there a way that literally like DoorDash and Uber Eats, can they deliver this stuff? Is that gonna, I mean, is that
We don't
gonna
have those
happen like?
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
supposed to
she
now?
said.
Like,
No.
Yeah.
Bezos out.
We expect that to